Kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1925. Cross that one off. Trivia Thursday genealogy tips. What can we... My hands are really dry. Oh, I forgot to put moisturizer on. Sorry, I just had a shower. I was going to do it this morning, but we got very busy this morning. Which... we emptied out a couple of lockers and sparkles, and over half of it ended up in the trash or recycling. So that was really good to get those two lockers empty out of there. I did not find Zeffy's toy I've been looking for, but I did find another one, which I didn't realize I had. So that was pretty cool. But anyway, so we had a busy morning doing that, and I didn't get a chance to get a shower before I got on the chat. So I just thought I'll wait till after we take Zeffy for a walk. So now I'm feeling all nice and comfortable, and I totally forgot to put hand lotion on. What are you? This was one of the things we found today. It squeaks. Guess who suddenly got energy and wants to play? So my apologies for that. Okay, so let's talk about Trivia Thursday genealogy tips. So we're looking about different things that you might find. Like, did you know that past census records sometimes ask questions like, are you a pauper or a convict? Do you own a radio? I think it was the 1910 one, the U.S. federal census in 1910. How many pregnancies have you had, and how many children are still living? Things like that. But the really cool part is that these quirky questions can give us a glimpse into Steffi! Showtime, sweetie, not playtime. Can give us a glimpse into the concerns and social context of the times. Like, do you have a radio? They're trying to figure out how many homes have radios, how many people are we broadcasting to, could be broadcasting to. That used to be a form of entertainment as well. When you'd listen to, people would gather around the radio and listen to the radio shows that were on that night. So if your family if your ancestors had a radio, you could just picture them sitting there in their living room of their house with the radio on, and you're all sitting to listen to whatever show is on. And they used to have shows that had plays, that had singing, that had orchestras playing, all sorts of really cool stuff. So you could just, Zeffy, come here, bring it here. Good girl. You're going to have to wait now. And just really cool different programs and stuff that were on at the time. And did you know that surnames didn't always stay the same? Due to immigration, cultural shifts, and even clerical errors, family names could change significantly over time, affecting the way we trace our ancestors. And speaking of names changing due to immigration and cultural shifts and that sort of thing, not many records were changed at Ellis Island. People think that Ellis Island would change their names to make them sound more American. It was not the people at Ellis Island that did it. It was the people coming in that requested their name changes at the time when they came in. It wasn't the people at on Ellis, the officials at Ellis Island that changed the names. It was the people coming in wanted to sound more American. They could have been escaping religious persecution or some other thing that was going on at their homeland, and they just wanted to make things they wanted to sound more American when they came in. Did you know that many of the old occupations we read in historical records, like Chandler is a candle maker, Cordwainer was a shoemaker, and Reeve was a local official. And these terms have fallen out of common use. Understanding these terms can help you decode your ancestors' job titles. Because when you're looking at a lot of census reports, it will ask what their occupation is. Most of my family were laborers, although we did have the jewelry maker in there at one point. And so when you're looking up different, and you see the different terms, you go, what's a chandler? And you can go look at it's a candle maker. So there were different, and a cobbler at that, and the Wayback Machine, you can still have cobbler today, which people know as a shoemaker, but the cordwainer was a different one, that's a very older term. And I was like, that's a kind of a cool term. Did you know that some of the causes of death listed in old records sound strange to modern ears? Terms like gripe, milk sickness, and dropsy were common in earlier centuries, reflecting the medical understanding of the time. Now, these were terms that were very short, easy to spell, not like some of the stuff we've got out there. I mean, when Brad was doing all of his chemo and treatments and everything else, and they were rattling off all this medication and their names, I looked at them and I said, who the heck came up with these names? They need to be shot. Trying to remember what chemicals he was getting for chemo, and And it was just like the medical terms sometimes were just so ridiculous. It's sort of like, oh my gosh. And I have a friend who is a nurse, and she spent ages and ages and ages having to learn all this terminology that's in the medical field. It's like another language. It really is. And there are some, and it's not just the medical field. There are other fields too that have their own language, that if you don't understand their language, you may not understand the stuff that you're reading in the newspapers or the stuff that you're reading on reports and things for what your ancestor did. So take time to read those records. If you don't know something, look up the word. So you just go, oh, I'll figure that out later. No, go look it up there and then. It takes like 2 seconds to do it. Did you know that older records often use used abbreviations and ditto marks? For example, D/O, so D/O means daughter of, and you will quite often, or do, or a simple dash would be to use, it would be used to repeat the previous entry. You see this a lot on census reports. When, if you've got someone that's born in Ireland, they'll have like the double dashes, they'll have like a simple dash across, meaning that everybody in that column, like if they're in a community where they're all Irish or came from Ireland, they would have that, and parents were born in Ireland, mum and dad were born in Ireland, so there'd be like this, there would be a DO, just like do, that was underneath all of these things. That meant that all these people on this page, their parents came from Ireland. And this was quite common, especially on census reports. So understanding some of the shorthand symbols is key to reading older documents more accurately as well. And did you know that naming trends varied greatly by era? For instance, names like Mabel were popular in the 1800s, while Gary was the top choice in the 1950s. Knowing these trends can help you understand your ancestors' cultural context as well. Like the 1700s, 1800s, I've got George, Thomas, James, John, and William are the 5 common first names in the Eakins clan and the Eakins ancestors back in the 1700s and the 1800s. They were around for a couple of centuries. Most common names for them. Sometimes I come across a Samuel, I'm like, what happened? Who is he? I remember coming across a Samuel or a Frank one time, and I was like, wait, this doesn't seem right. It's not a George, a Thomas, a James, a John, or a William. What's going on here? But it forces you to stop and look at the records too. When you know that these trends are around, and you find several of one first name repeated multiple times, like George, John, James, William, and Thomas, you find them, and sometimes you'll see Thomas written as THOS. That's it, Voss. And that was the abbreviation for Thomas. I don't make this stuff up. But when you know the common names, you know that you have to be aware of them. There could also be a family name in there that's a very unusual name, but it can actually have those unusual names that are in a family that come down through, that is passed down through generations, can actually assist you in learning things, especially if it was not a common name in any time period anywhere. It was a family name that was passed from generation to generation. It can make it very easy to follow the ancestral line back. But of course, verify everything first. Just because that family name is in there does not mean they're the only person that had that name, but it can help narrow things down. Did you know that records like tax rolls, city directories, and school registries can be just as valuable as census records? And these are often overlooked resources to unlock important details about your ancestors' life. When you have like the 1890 census here in the US, does not exist unless you're from a certain state or county. Most of, like 98% of it was destroyed in, like, I think it was 1932. It was just trying to remember when the fire was. But you can build up that census report by looking at tax records, city directories, school registries to get an idea of if your ancestors were still living in that area. And that information can be just as valuable based on what's on there. In the city directories, based on the time period you were in, it would have the last name like Smith, and then it would have everybody with the Smith that have all their first names down there, usually males. And then in parentheses next to the male's name would be the wife's first name. Sometimes you would come across a woman's name in there, and if you had a look next to it, in parentheses, it could have widow of, da-da-da-da-da. So you're like, oh, he died. And of course, then it has their address as well. So you can see where they were living at the time. You can help compare that with the census that was before that time period, that was after that time period, things like that. Electoral rolls is another one as well. In New Zealand, we have electoral rolls down there, and It makes it very easy to find people because you're looking for the address. Who lived all at the same address? Who was the mother, who was the father, who were their kids? Because you've got all these, you've got like 7 people that are living at this address that are all over the age of 18. So who are, it might have been 21 at that point. At one point it was 21, then got moved to 18, I think. Or was it always 18? I can't remember. I'll have to go look that up. But looking at those records, you could see all of their names. But here's the other cool part about the directories as well, and the electoral rolls, and probably the tax record. I haven't looked at tax records yet, but looking at tax records directories, it would also have in there their occupation. So you could find, is this the right person I'm looking for? So you could then go, if you've got a census report you're looking at, and you can go and look at a city directory that was around that same time, and you can find that person at that address that's listed on the census report. Now you can find out, is that the same person? Because it may not have the occupation, or it has the occupation on there. So is this correct? So you've got 2 ways of connecting those 2 people together. But if one doesn't have the occupation, the other one does. School registries, where did they go to school? How long did they stay in school for? How many years were they educated? So it's another way of looking at that thing as well. But they do have important information there too. Did you know, now a lot of schools in the US here are putting yearbooks online. And through Ancestry, you can go and search yearbooks for different schools and everything else. I have found my late husband in a lot of the ones for the schools that he went to. I have found his brothers in there as well. And so that's kind of cool going back there and looking at that sort of stuff. I mean, did I find my father-in-law? No, that wasn't him. It was, might have been cousins, my husband's cousins. But, you can go back through directories, and when you're looking in the school yearbooks, you can see, were they involved in the drama club? Were they on the debating team? Were they on a sports team? What activities were they involved with at school? And so you get a glimpse into things like that as well, especially on the yearbooks and things. Did you know there are many common genealogy myths? And this is one of them, is not every person with the same last name is necessarily related. And family names were rarely changed at Ellis Island. And it's important to research thoroughly and verify these assumptions. So if somebody turns around and tells you, their names got changed at Ellis Island. Nope. I know my husband's family, when they came into the country, they changed their name after Ellis Island. So when I go and look up the Ellis Island records, I find them on the name that they were known by in Ukraine, Lithuania, and Russia. And I can actually find them on the 1910 census with their Jewish last name, and then after that they shortened that with their original name, and then they shortened it after that time period. Then when my father-in-law was around 6, they went from Abramsovich to Abrams to Brahms, and the Brahms came in when my husband's grandfather decided to move it from Abrams to Brahms. So when I'm looking for family members, I have to remember not all of them were Brahms. Some of them stayed Abrams. So I've got to go and look at that. Some of them stayed as Abramsovich. So when I'm looking, I have to look under those 3 last names, and then variations of spelling on Abramsovich and Abrams and Brahms, to try and find the right people that fit into the tree. Because some of them never changed their names. Some shortened it. Some didn't. Some followed my husband's grandfather and changed their last name to Brahms as well. So it's, it makes it fun trying to find people. Did you know legal terms like bond servant, indentured, and yeoman appear often in older records? And understanding these terms can shed light on your ancestors' social standings and the legal systems they navigated. So what are the differences? What is a bond servant? A bond servant was an individual who worked under contract, called a bond, for a set period in exchange for something, usually passage to the New World, food, clothing, or shelter. They weren't paid wages, but agreed to serve for a specific term, often 4 to 7 years, in exchange for something that would help them get started in life, such as travel expenses or training in a trade. After fulfilling the bond, they were typically granted freedom or a small piece of land. In some cases, a bond servant was essentially a form of forced labor, though they weren't considered slaves, as their servitude was for a fixed term. An indentured servant was similar to a bond servant, but had more formalized and legally binding contract. Indenture contracts were written agreements where the individual, often young, poor, or from overpopulated regions, agreed to work for a certain number of years, again 4 to 7 years, in exchange for passage to the colonies, room, board, or training in a specific skill. After completing their term of service, indentured servants were usually freed and sometimes given land or tools to help them establish themselves. The contract could also be transferred or sold, and sometimes conditions were harsh, leading to significant abuse of indentured servants. Hang on, getting a dry throat. A yeoman was a small landowner or farmer who worked their own land, often without the need for hired help. The term was particularly common in England and colonial America. Yeomen were considered to be in a higher social class than laborers or peasants, but below the gentry or the aristocrats. So you can kind of think of them, I'm guessing you kind of think of them as middle class because they were between those two areas. They were independent farmers, often owning enough land to support themselves and their family, but not large estates. In colonial America, yeomen played an important role in the development of agriculture and society, particularly in the New England colonies. They were often self-sufficient and prized for their work ethic and their role in the local economy. So those are the differences between them. Did you know famous genealogy discoveries like Barack Obama's Irish ancestry or Beyonce's French heritage or Brooke Shields being a direct descendant of Charlemagne have inspired people to explore their own family trees. Celebrity family trees often bring unexpected connections to light. And one of my favorite, I have several favorite genealogy programs that I like. One of them is Genealogy Roadshow, where it's kind of like the Antiques Roadshow, but people bring in their genealogy with questions and stuff. And they're actually sent in advance when they announce they're coming to a certain city. They're looking for certain stories and things. And so they will send the information in advance so the genealogists have time to research it before the show. And then they get invited to come on the show. And then there's others that come in and they're actually able to ask questions of people then. But the ones that you typically see that are on the show are the ones who have sent information in beforehand, and they're not just somebody who turned up in line. So they were actually able to go and research them. But one of my other favorite shows is Who Do You Think You Are? I love the British version, and then the Americans, of course, did their version as well. And it just fascinates me. I get chills, goosebumps when some of the stories that come out of that the celebrity that they're doing had no clue about. There's been all sorts of things, like there's stories of piracy in there. There's stories of being a dance hall girl. What else is there? There's stories of being officers in the militia. There's been stories of them being officers in the Civil War. There's been all sorts of incredible stories, discovering their heritage, thinking that they came from America and finding out that they came from, somewhere in Europe or might be related to some European royalty in that. Lisa Kudrow's one was, because she's one of the executive producers for the American version. And her one was heart-wrenching because she has a Jewish background and she had family ancestors that were involved, that were killed by the Nazis during World War II. And one of the places that she went to was a memorial in this little town that was completely wiped. It was all Jewish and completely wiped out. Like, it was annihilated. And she's standing there looking at this memorial for it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I'm just like in tears. And then they tell her that there is a family member that is still living in that town. And she got to meet them. And they were like 80 something years old. And it was just, it was absolutely incredible just watching these two people connect. And there are times in the stories where they do actually get to meet somebody who was related to one of their ancestors. They may not be in the direct line, but they could be in one of those side branches, like a sibling related to one of the ancestors and things. And they get to meet them and they get to talk with them and they get to see photographs and things like that, things that they had not had before. And I'm just like totally engrossed in those things. Oh, who was it? One of them actually had an ancestor that was arrested for being a witch in the Salem witch trials. And but I think it was before they were tried. That's when they stopped. That was right towards the end of the Salem witch trials, and their ancestor was arrested for being a witch, but never got to go to trial because they abolished the witch hunts, basically. And so that was kind of, interesting. And I think it was Susan Sarandon, and her comment was, "Well, I guess she lived, or I wouldn't be." Well, makes perfect sense. But just the information that they're able to find and get connected to and things like that is just absolutely amazing. And who was it? Oh, Valerie Bertinelli had a really cool heritage as well. And yeah, she wasn't looking at the Italian side of her. She was looking at the British. There was a connection to England in there as well, and a king, and to one of, like, I think it was William the Conqueror was her ancestor. But just fascinating stories. And because of these shows, people are getting interested in looking and searching for their family roots, and looking at their ancestors and wanting to hunt their tree and seeing, who am I related to? What's in there? What's not in there? And finding interesting stories along the way. And of course, now you've thrown DNA in there. So there's like DNA genealogies, it's a whole branch of DNA genealogy. And I can't wait. I've got a class lined up, but with my move to New Zealand and everything, I think I'm going to have to push that class back till after my move, because there's a beginning class in genealogy. I've done like a precursor, but then there's like a week-long class that goes 5 days for Monday through Thursday all day, and then half a day on Friday. And I'll either be enrolling it or I'll be pushing it back, because I should be in New Zealand by the time that takes place. Yeah, which will mean, because they start at, what time do they start? I think it's 8 a.m. Pacific time. So at that time of the year for me, it will probably be like 3 o'clock in the morning. Getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, spending all day on it. But the cool part is I'm done by lunchtime. From 3 through to like lunchtime, I'm done. Some of them have evening things, which would be early afternoon for me, and then I can go take a nap. And Zephy will get walked somewhere in there as well, although they do have a lunch break. So lunch break would be breakfast time. So then Zephy and I could go for a walk. And if I'm still with my parents, living with my parents at that point too, then we could, the lunch break would be our breakfast break. So I could sit and have breakfast with my mum and dad, and take Zephy for a walk, come home, have breakfast, get back online, because we get like an hour-long break. But anyway, but that's for another day to sort out. So finding your genealogy can reveal lots and lots of really cool little bits of trivia and stuff. Like you could go to the next family reunion and go, did you know, da, 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 and or at a family meal, like if you're doing like a traditional family, if you got the family together for a meal or something, and you start talking, start sharing myths and legends. And I found this today. Had to replace the batteries in it, but I do actually have stuff recorded on here. So being able to take and just sitting this on the table where everybody can like talk into it. And you can actually, I think on this one, you can put I'm trying to see the engraving on it. Yeah, you can actually put an external microphone on this. It's got a little slot here for an external microphone. This is for headphones, and this is for this is the microphone here. This one is your headphones, and this one is an external microphone. So you can put a microphone in the middle of the table and just let everybody talk, and record it all on here, and start sharing family stories and things. Who can come up with the most bizarre story and the most bizarre true story in your family and your family's ancestors? There's a good challenge for you. Oh, that might be a cool one for Thanksgiving. Who can come up with the wackiest true story regarding your ancestors, or one of your ancestors, or one of their siblings or cousins and things like that? So yeah, there you go. There's a challenge for you. Anyway, with that, I'm out of here. Go out, have a super fun